Test. Thank you, Mark, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone, to Episode 5 of the Bulletin History Podcast. For this episode, we travel to Southwest Virginia, home to the town of Radford and the Army Ammunition Plant bearing its name. Radford Army Ammunition Plant supplies propellants, energetics, and munitions to the armed forces today. It was one of the first single-base, smokeless powder plants authorized under the National Defense Program. Construction began in 1940 on what would become a 6,821-acre facility divided into two areas. The Radford plant hosts the manufacturing area on more than 4,000 acres in Pulaski and Montgomery counties, 7 miles northeast of the city of Radford, and 8 miles southwest of Blacksburg. The New River unit houses storage bunkers on more than 2,700 acres, 6 miles away southeast of Dublin. During its existence, while it existed, throughout its life, the installation has been a key part of the local economy. Its component parts have been known by several other names, including New River Ammunition Storage Depot, Radford Ordnance Works, New River Ordnance Works, Radford Ordnance Plant, New River Ordnance Plant, and Radford Arsenal. But we'll cover that more later. First, let's look at the rich history of Western Virginia. The part of the state where Radford developed is in the foothills of what is known as the Valley and Ridge province of Southwest Virginia, specifically in the northeastern corner of New River Valley, an area occupying parts of Pulaski and Montgomery counties. The main plant lies on New River, also called Kanawha River, which is the oldest river in North America and the third oldest river in the world. Oriented in a northeast-southwest direction, New River Valley is 2 miles wide in the plant area, 8 miles wide at its widest point, and 25 miles long. New River is the most spectacular natural feature at the Radford plant. It forms the Horseshoe Bend with nearly vertical cliffs along part of the installation. The cliffs provide roosting and nesting habitat for the largest concentration of black vultures and turkey vultures on the East Coast. The areas around both the Radford and New River plant sites are also home to gray squirrels, cottontail rabbits, quail, grouse, and deer. The land is managed to encourage wildlife, with many areas returned to natural grasses. Prior to European settlement, the Horseshoe Bend area of New River was a crossroads for several Native American tribes, including Cherokee, Siksika, Saponi, Occaneechi, Monacan, and Manahoac. The first recorded European contact in western Virginia was near present-day Saltville, 60 miles southwest of Radford. In 1567, Spanish soldiers, led by explorer Juan Pardo, destroyed the Siksika village of Maniatic. By 1671, the Tutelo, or Tutero, tribe had moved into the region from the Ohio River Valley due to Iroquois pressure during the Beaver Wars. The Tutelo established several villages in the valley, including one near present-day Salem, west of Roanoke. After 1600, the Tutelo pushed further south into Occaneechi territory along with present North Carolina. After 1600, the Tutelo had pushed further south into Occaneechi territory along the present North Carolina border. Due to pressures placed on them by increasing numbers of European arrivals, the Saponi, Tutelo, and Occaneechi collectively migrated north to Pennsylvania in the 1730s, where they were adopted and absorbed by New York's Cayuga Nation in the 1750s. By 1824, most Native American tribes had been pushed out of Virginia completely. European settlement in the Radford area dates from 1746, when Jacob Harmon established a homestead at Horseshoe Bend on the site of the future Radford Arsenal. Harmon and his sons, fur traders, were soon killed by members of the local indigenous population. In 1762, early permanent resident William Ingalls began operating a ferry across the New River, south of Horseshoe Bend, serving settlers traveling along the Wilderness Road across the Appalachians. Soon, businesses, including taverns, livery stables, inns, and other services, sprung up near the ferry to take advantage of the growing number of settlers heading west. These businesses, huddled along the banks of New River, became the hub of a settlement called Lovely Mount, which became a significant stop for travelers. Dr. John Blair Radford pushed land. Dr. John Blair Radford purchased land in the area in 1842, becoming a prominent settler and the namesake for the future community of Radford. In 1854, the Virginia and Tennessee Railroad came through Lovely Mount, leading to a rapid population increase. Because of its strategic positioning between the eastern and western parts of the state, Lovely Mount became the site of a large regional railroad depot. The town continued to grow, and in 1891, changed its name to Radford. The land around Radford has been primarily agrarian throughout its settlement history, and currently contains everything from small subsistence farms to large commercial operations. As early as 1854, accessibility to railroads made the area an attractive base for the export of cattle and produce, particularly cabbage, potatoes, and melons. The number of commercial dairy farms increased significantly beginning in the 1920s, and by the end of World War II, most area farms concentrated on beef, hogs, dairy, or poultry. Between 1900 and 1930, many industries came to Radford, including Between 1900 and 1930, many industries came to Radford, including an ice company, a creamery, milling operations, and piping and preserving plants. In 1913, Radford was selected to become home to the State Normal School, a women's college, further increasing the town's profile. That school would become Radford College in 1924 and Radford University in 1979. During World War I, the United States occasionally struggled to procure enough war materiel for the armed forces. During World War I, the United States occasionally struggled to procure enough war materiel for the armed forces. This experience showed the military that more effective planning was needed for the procurement of munitions for future conflicts. This experience showed the military that more effective planning was needed to provide This experience showed the military that more effective planning was needed to provide procurement of munitions for future conflicts. To correct some of the mistakes made in the 1910s, Congress passed the National Defense Act of 1920. Included in this sweeping legislation was clear delineation of responsibility for procurement planning through the Assistant Secretary of War. By 1922, 13 ordnance districts had been established across the United States to handle procurement planning. 6 arsenals already in existence would contribute significantly to the planning efforts, thanks to their specialization in Thanks to their specialization in producing war material and their exper- Thanks to their specialization in producing war material and their experience with the design and testing of crucial manufacturing processes, though more manufacturing facilities and storage sites would be needed for future conflicts. Despite the government's commitment on paper to improve procurement, the absence of imminent need led to steady disarmament in the 1920s and 1930s. Eventually, only 4 plants remained that could produce smokeless powder, a product required for many munitions used by the United States and its allies. An effective push to upgrade the military manufacturing capabilities of the United States did not come until rising tensions in Europe and Asia made preparedness necessary. Aggressive actions by Germany and Japan led to a reactionary increase in the United States military budget, from $7 million in 1934 to $11 million in 1935. Recognizing the growing possibility of war in Europe by 1937, the Ordnance Department worked to increase the Ordnance Department worked to increase American smokeless powder manufacturing capabilities, enlisting private industry to draft engineering plans for new ammunition plants. Germany's annexation of Austria and the Sudetenland in 1938 dramatically increased the likelihood of war, leading several European countries to buy significant numbers of supplies from the United States. Leading several European countries to buy significant amounts of supplies from the United States. American legislation initially restricted these sales to non-military goods, but military officials believed it was only a matter of time before the United States would also need to provide war material to friendly nations. In advance of this, Congress funded an expansion of load, assemble, and pack, or LAP, sites, small arms ammunition manufacturing, and powder facilities, with a corresponding order to start purchasing war material already in short supply from private industries. With Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939, Britain and France declared war, and the United States started selling surplus U.S. war materiel to the Allied powers. At that time, the U.S. government estimated the production capacity of existing facilities would only cover 5% of the munitions Allies were likely to need for the war. Recognizing the increasing need for U.S. support, Congress passed a Defense Appropriations Act in June 1940, along with supplemental acts allowing for the construction of government-owned, contractor-operated, or GOCO facilities. The first GOCO contract was signed in July 1940 with E.I. DuPont de Nemours and Company for construction and operation of a smokeless powder plant in southern Indiana. The next 3 contracts, all signed in August 1940, were for a LAP facility at Ravenna, a tank arsenal at Detroit, and a propellant and explosives plant at Radford. Let's deep dive that process together and see how it goes. The Mason and Hanger Company signed a contract with the U.S. government for the construction of 4 plants, including Radford Ordnance Works, with the operating contractor to be Hercules Powder Company of Wilmington, Delaware. Under the aegis of the National Defense Program, Radford Ordnance Works and Indiana Ordnance Works were the first to begin construction. The locations for the new manufacturing plants were determined by several factors. They needed to be close to major railroad lines for access, on reasonably level and unoccupied land for cost, located more than 200 miles from the coast for protection, with sufficient access to labor and raw materials, especially water, and isolated from cities for safety. Political clout also influenced the final locations chosen for new manufacturing facilities. On 30 July 1940, representatives from the On July 30th, 1940, representatives from the National Defense Council, the Ordnance Department, and the War Department inspected the Radford area and recommended the location, citing the railroad lines and the availability of labor as primary benefits of the site. proposed location the proposed location for what soon became Radford Ordnance Works was well protected by the Appalachian and Blue Ridge mountain ranges. It was also rural, isolated from the city of Radford, safely on the other side of New River, and possessed an adequate source of water. The proximity of nearby Appalachian coal fields could also provide a ready supply of fuel. Most importantly, the presence of the Norfolk and Western and Virginian railways ensured that products and labor could move to and from Radford with ease. The Radford property initially consisted of two areas: the smokeless powder plant, Radford Ordnance Works, on the site of the current Army Ammunition Plant, and a bag-loading plant 12 miles away for artillery, cannon, and mortar projectiles using powder manufactured at New River Ordnance Plant. For clarity, an installation is considered a plant if fabrication or assembly took place there. It is called a works if it produced other materials required for production. Load, assembly, and pack facilities were therefore identified as plants during World War II, while sites that manufactured powder, explosives, chemicals, or incendiaries were classified as works. The Radford and New River sites operated separately through 1950, when Radford assumed management of New River. Only two of the existing 6 government plants, at Picatinny and Frankfort, could produce smokeless powder. The pressing need for powder was the main reason for pushing through the construction of Radford Ordnance Works. This would be the first powder plant operated by the Ordnance Department, and the second new powder plant in the United States, after the privately owned Tennessee Powder Company in Millington, Tennessee, which eventually became the Chickasaw Ordnance Works. Construction at Radford Ordnance Works began on September 6, 1940, under the supervision of the Quartermaster Corps. Completion of the first smokeless powder line was accomplished in 10 months. Responsibility for design, construction, and operation of the plant fell to Hercules Powder Corporation, which would become the contractor-operator of several other GOCO facilities. Hercules began as an explosives company serving the mining industry, gun owners, and the military. Prior to World War II, Hercules was the third largest provider of explosives in the nation. The initial Radford construction borrowed from the design of 2 Hercules plants operating in New Jersey, the Parlin Nitro-Cotton Plant and the Kenville Smokeless Powder Plant. Almost immediately, Hercules felt increased pressure from the Army to finish the Radford plant as quickly as possible. On September 12, 1940, an explosion in the solvent recovery buildings at the Kenville plant shut down the country's only operating smokeless powder plant. Every building within 600 yards of the explosion was destroyed. With powder production brought to a standstill, and with a rival DuPont powder plant already under construction in Indiana, Hercules pushed to finish Radford. The government would need Radford powder production to reach 50,000 pounds of small arms powder and 250,000 pounds of cannon powder per day. Despite the need to speed up the timeline, design changes would be needed before the Radford project could move forward. No one wanted a repeat of the Kenville disaster. That explosion had shown, contrary to prevailing theories, that unconfined bulk smokeless powder was a hazard. This required a complete redesign of the solvent recovery process. As a result, the powder production lines were spaced out further, the cotton, powder, and magazine areas were relocated to the other side of New River, and several administrative and office buildings were relocated for increased safety. These changes caused the cost of the project to balloon. Original estimates for the Radford plant had been calculated in July 1940, before the initial plans had even been completed or the final site had been approved. Those early estimates were based on costs incurred in the construction of the Kenville and Parlin plants. Those facilities had been built on flatter land and in a more compact space. The increased spatial requirements required to avoid a repeat of the Kenville explosion pushed the Radford footprint into hillier areas, requiring more grading. Pushing across New River also required building a heavy-duty bridge. The enlarged footprint meant more money would be needed for The enlarged footprint also meant more money would be needed for roads and utilities. With redesign creating building delays and cost overruns, construction of Radford became rushed and hectic. Even so, Radford Ordnance Works was dedicated on March 14, 1941, just over 6 months from the start of construction. Line A went into operation first, beating the Indiana production plant to the Line A was in operation first, beating the Indiana production plant to the punch. Powder production began in early April, 3 months ahead of schedule. In mid-September 1941, Hercules received the order to build a pentolite plant capable of manufacturing 10,000 pounds of explosives per day. The work began on the 1st of October and was completed in March 1942, with the military's operations department overseeing the Hercules facility. Mid-1941 was the height of Radford construction, with up to 23,150 workers on site, not counting government personnel. In June 1941, there were 827 operations employees and 14,706 construction workers. It was not until October 1941 that those in operations outnumbered those in construction. By the end of 1941, employment stood at 908 in construction, 6,387 working for Hercules, and 343 government personnel. By January 15, 1942, with the first phase complete, construction employment reached a low of 758. Recruitment efforts to cover wartime production needs led to a peak of 4,387 operations employees by September 1942. Radford was the first of 6 GOCO installations engineered and operated by Hercules. These sites included New River Ordnance Plant, Badger Ordnance Works in Baraboo, Wisconsin, Missouri Ordnance Works in Louisiana, Missouri, Sunflower Ordnance Works in DeSoto, Kansas, Virginia Ordnance Works in Glen Wilton, Virginia, and Volunteer Ordnance Works in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Radford trained more than 1,100 employees to operate these other ordnance plants while operating its own research and development department. By comparison, New River Ordnance Plant was designed and operated as a separate facility, though it had the same commanding officer as Radford. Construction began in February 1941 with bag operations starting that fall. The plant was in full operation by January 1942 with a flash reducer loading line, black powder drying facilities, and eventually 5 bag loading lines. By May 1943, the government decided to terminate bag loading operations at New River and place it in standby. The storage area was then operated as a storage depot. After the shutdown, most New River employees were transferred to Radford or other plants, while powder produced at Radford was shipped to Indiana for loading. Between September 1943 and July 1944, operations at New River were confined to the waterproofing of trench mortar material and powder storage. In July 1944, the War Department realized the plants at Hoosier and Coosa River could not keep up with demand, so the New River plant became a full-scale propellant loading facility through the end of the war. Construction of Radford Ordnance Works made Radford a boom town once again, as people poured into the community by the thousands. By the end of November 1940, Radford was operating a bus service to bring workers from nearby communities. Beginning in January 1941, the Norfolk and Western ran 5 trains a day just to transport workers from Roanoke. Trailer camps, boarding houses, and shopping and entertainment ventures soon sprang up to serve the growing community. By necessity, schools and emergency services were expanded, while roads and spur rail lines were constructed or upgraded. Radford Ordnance Works brought an immediate influx of workers to the area. Thanks to the railroad, workers soon relocated to Radford from 45 states. with most coming from Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina. When workers first arrived, there was a severe housing shortage, forcing people to sleep wherever they could. Locals rented out spare bedrooms, outbuildings, basements, back porches, and attics to new arrivals. In many cases, several men rented a single bed, a situation made possible by round-the-clock shifts. Housing was quickly built for workers at both Radford and New River. Federal Housing Authority projects created Radford Village, Monroe Terrace, and Sunset Village in Radford, and McGill Village in the town of Pulaski. Private developments included Fair Lawn, Lehigh Court, Victory Heights, and Airport Acres. As part of the original contract with Hercules, 16 two-story colonial revival-style houses were constructed southwest of the Radford Ordnance Works site. The plant also provided housing for many workers in 7 concrete block barracks. Constructed on the southeastern side of the operations area. Each had a 10-stall toilet and a 6-stall shower and could hold 104 men. Number 6 barracks was designated for women in February 1943, and another was added by the end of 1944. In March 1945, construction was initiated to build a new 2-story barracks and to place a 2nd story on 6 of the existing structures, but only 3 were completed before the end of the war. Women initially worked in traditional gender-segregated roles like mail clerks, phone and teletype operators, receptionists, and nurses. As the war continued, and men were increasingly drafted into the military, an acute labor shortage developed, creating opportunities for women and African Americans to hold jobs previously reserved for white men. By April 1942, women were being transferred to do manufacturing operations at Radford Ordnance Works. It became the first plant in the smokeless powder industry to employ women in production on a large scale. By August 1945, when production wound down, women accounted for nearly 49% of the smokeless powder workforce. By 1944, a shortage of workers, both male and female, threatened the production ability of the New River and Radford installations. Until this time, African Americans had been restricted to menial jobs at the plants. To counter the labor shortage, one 105mm line at New River was designated for operation exclusively by black employees. By January 1945, there were approximately 800 involved in production. According to Hercules, one of the biggest problems was costs associated with providing segregated facilities, which was a requirement of Virginia law. Even the hospital basement was remodeled to provide segregated facilities for patients. The primary mission of Radford Ordnance Works during World War II was the production of smokeless powder. In addition to material for rifles, machine guns, and conventional cannon, Radford produced powders for trench mortars, chemical mortars, recoilless rifles, and large and small rockets. Numerous raw materials used in the smokeless powder process were produced at Radford, including nitric acid, sulfuric acid, and nitrocellulose. Radford made nitric acid from anhydrous ammonia, while its oleum plant made fuming sulfuric acid from raw sulfur. Explosives produced at Radford included nitroglycerin, pentaerythritol tetranite, and pentolite. TNT was not produced at Radford until 1968. Instead, Radford obtained TNT from Virginia Ordnance Works until that plant closed in September 1942, after which the supply came from Indiana Ordnance Works. A TNT line was completed at Radford in June 1943, but it was not used during World War II. Radford also hosted some special guests during World War II, but I'll have more to say about that at the end of the episode. 12 rolled powder lines were under construction at Radford in August 1945 when the Japanese surrendered. Construction stopped immediately with less than 50% of the work complete. The last can of stick powder was packed on September 19, 1945. 3 days later, all production stopped. Hercules closed the plant, and Radford was put on standby status. During the war, Radford Ordnance Works had produced 44 types of propellant, including 464 million pounds of smokeless powder and 28 million pounds of pentolite. At its highest capacity, production reached 170% of expectations. With the cessation of hostilities in August 1945, Radford Ordnance Works went into standby and was turned over to the government in late 1945. Contractor personnel dropped from 7,400 to 5,400 in the first month. In mid-February 1946, the Ordnance Department took over the plant. Orders to terminate the Ordnance Department took over the plant. Orders to terminate activities at New River came in August 1945, and the plant was declared surplus. However, in 1946, the New River magazine area was withdrawn from surplus and placed in standby status. Through January 1948, parts of the manufacturing area were sold and today are part of an industrial park. In late October 1945, Radford was renamed Radford Arsenal, with New River integrated into its structure. Currently, in addition to storage magazines, several World War II-era buildings remain standing, including a guardhouse, pipe shop, carpenter shop, boiler house, lunchroom, and battery recharging stations. Other buildings and equipment have been sold or dismantled. In 1946, Hercules received a new contract to produce ammonium nitrate. From June 1946 to April 1949, Radford Arsenal was one of 15 wartime explosives plants producing ammonium nitrate for the War Department's fertilizer production program. The nitric acid area was reactivated for this production, shipping fertilizer to Europe as part of the Marshall Plan. Other locations redesignated for fertilizer production including Louisiana Ordnance Plant, Lone Star Ordnance Plant, Illinois Ordnance Plant, and Milan Arsenal. The fertilizer program ended when Hercules was contracted to produce rocket powder in April 1949. However, this contract was small, requiring only 300 employees. From that point, Radford has been in continuous production. During the post-World War II period, the installation produced propellant for rockets like the Honest John, Little John, Nike Atlas, and Nike Hercules. As tensions mounted on the Korean Peninsula, Radford saw a resurgence in production of smokeless powder. Once it was clear greater capacity was needed, major reconstruction and renovation was implemented to bring Radford Arsenal to full efficiency. By 1951, powder production lines were reactivated, with nitroglycerin manufacturing beginning late that year. The stick powder and trench mortar facilities were also reactivated, making it necessary to restart a major section of the plant. During this period, Radford produced single, double, and triple base propellant powders, rolled powder, acid, solvent, nitrocellulose, and nitroglycerin, and manufactured and loaded cast propellant. Component parts for missiles were also produced there by the Goodyear Aircraft Corporation. By June 1951, employment at Radford reached 3,700. The arsenal reached peak production in July 1953 when it produced approximately 13 million pounds of powder. When hostilities ended in Korea, personnel at the arsenal again declined in December 1950. Personnel at the arsenal again declined to 2,200 by 1958. When hostilities ended in Korea, personnel at the arsenal again declined to just over 2,200 in 1958, as Radford went into active status role, drastically scaled down. In November 1961, Radford Arsenal and New River Ordnance Plant were redesignated as Radford Ordnance Plant. By then, the installation was producing propellants, missile motors, explosives, and chemical materials on 5 production lines. More than a third of the plant's properties remained in layaway status and out of production, while more of New River was sold to private interests. Beginning in 1962, production at Radford increased to support actions in Vietnam, and in 1963, the installation became Radford Army Ammunition Plant. By 1968, as tensions in Southeast Asia intensified, Radford propellant production reached a record level, producing 162 million pounds, eclipsing World War II and Korean conflict levels by a substantial margin. By December of that year, employment at the plant surged to 9,000. A renovation and modernization program was initiated, with 3 automated TNT lines completed in 1968. This was the first facility operated in the United States for continuous nitration and purification of TNT, with a capacity of 9 million pounds per month. By 1969, requirements for the Vietnam conflict were decreasing, however, and production tapered off accordingly. By June 1970, employment was down to 4,300. Employment at the plant continued to decline as modernization expanded. In June 1970, $26 million was approved for 5 projects at Radford. New facilities for ammonia oxidation and sulfuric acid regeneration, 2 nitric acid concentrators, and a continuous nitrocellulose nitration area. In addition, substantial improvements were made to decrease the pollution generated at Radford. On May 31st, 1974, an explosion at the nitration and purification building destroyed that facility, seriously injuring 5 employees and causing minor injuries to another 100, while causing extensive damage to nearby structures. The damage cost an estimated $10 million and prompted an intensive investigation which yielded 35 recommendations for improvement. On January 6, 1978, another explosion occurred in the nitroglycerin area, resulting in the deaths of 2 employees and causing 6 other injuries. According to witnesses, the explosion was so powerful it could be heard as far away as 20 miles. Although personnel levels would continue to decline through the 1970s, Radford's role as a major manufacturer of propellants continued. It retained consistent levels of production, with a sizable portion operated in support of foreign military sales. Production increased during the 1980s, with 1981 seeing a 60% increase from the year before. In February 1983, production of TNT resumed, and by the end of 1984, Radford had produced over 14,000 pounds, a 333% increase over 1983. Nearly all production saw similar increases, particularly in the area of solvent propellants. TNT production stopped in July 1986, at which point the plant was put in standby. However, TNT production stopped in July 1986, at which point the plant was put in standby. During Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, plans were made to reactivate the TNT plant at Radford, but the plant was returned to standby status before production began. Activity at Radford and other installations instead was geared toward the transportation of pre-existing stockpiles to the Persian Gulf. In 1995, Radford adopted a new organizational structure in which the 5 operating areas were made directly accountable for the cost, schedule, and quality of their respective products. Powder operations at Kenville were moved to Radford in 1996 under the name New River Energetics, creating 250 jobs in 2 years. Hercules remained the contractor operator until April 1995, when Alliant Technical Systems took over. In 1998, a medium-caliber LAP operation from Joliet Army Ammunition Plant was relocated to Radford. By this time, employment at the plant had fallen to 1,200. Radford undertook an extensive cost savings program at this time to remain cost competitive. The Armament Retooling and Manufacture Support Program, or ARMS, was activated with the goal of expanding commercial use of idle facilities at the plant, resulting in substantial savings to the Army's overhead. In 2000, Radford's aggressive campaigns to increase environmental stewardship resulted in a Federal Pollution Prevention Award and a State Environmental Excellence Award. During this time, Radford's mission underwent significant changes, with focus on making the plant a leaner, more efficient operation, with emphasis after 2001 on support of the global war on terror. In 2003, the operating contractor started building a new TNT facility with the capability of producing insensitive munitions. It was completed in 2005. Operation Iraqi Freedom again increased workload at Radford, and employment rose in response. Today, Radford provides America's warfighters with superior performing propellants, energetics, and munitions to enable engagement and destruction of targets with total confidence. To that end, Radford continues to undergo major modernization efforts to address challenges that could have a negative effect on production capability. From its birth as one of the first smokeless powder facilities in support of World War II, to conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, and the Persian Gulf, Radford Army Ammunition Plant has been the premier smokeless powder and munitions facility in the nation's arsenal. While its mission has changed and expanded over its lifetime, its importance remains vital. Its importance remains. It is a vital producer of propellants, nitrocellulose, rocket motors, and ammunition for the U.S. military mission. Now that's what I call a deep dive. For the rest of the episode, I'd like to briefly go back to World War II era Radford and those special guests I mentioned earlier. Much of this information is drawn from previous research by historian John Hammond Moore and the staff at Radford, so thank you to all those involved with this work. During World War II, members of the German, Italian, and Japanese militaries were interned as POWs in camps across the United States. At its peak in 1945, the United States housed more than 42,000 POWs, including over 371,000 Germans, 50,000 Italians, and nearly 4,000 Japanese at 700 camps. The first German POWs reached the United States in mid-1943, following the defeat of Rommel. The first camps in Virginia were Lee and Pickett, designated on August 6, 1943, to hold 1,000 prisoners each. By April 1944, 3 more camps had been added: Ashby, Patrick Henry, and Hampton Roads Port of Embarkation, with the five locations housing over 2,200 Germans, nearly 100. With the five locations housing more than 2,200 Germans and nearly 1,000 Italians. By 1945, 7,000 Germans were scattered across 27 Virginia camps. Most of the Italians were not POWs in the strictest sense. Members of Italian service units, they had volunteered for Allied service. Those considered reliable were given special uniforms and duties and a basic level of pay. More than half of Italian POWs in Virginia held this status and worked at Hampton Roads. Prisoners in the rest of the state were predominantly German. POW treatment varied according to which Allied nation captured them. Prisoners of the Soviet Union faced beating, starvation, and death. American-held prisoners were treated in accordance with the 1929 Geneva Convention, receiving food, clothing, and housing equivalent to those of an army recruit. Especially trustworthy POWs, willing to work, received extra credits to use in the canteen. The presence of POWs helped with the growing labor shortage in the latter years of World War II. In May 1943, 648 POWs were housed on the Radford Ordnance Works property. This was south of the Pennswide area along Struppel's Creek, a place dubbed Coffee Pot Bottom. The camp consisted of tents on a concrete pad. The camp consisted of tents set on concrete pads, enclosed with barbed wire and guarded by U.S. Army personnel. For security, POWs performed duties not directly related to the war effort, so they weren't manufacturing explosives or building bombs. Instead, they built buildings, laid sod, and did janitorial work. Some were even hired to work in local factories, harvest crops, or clear forests. At Radford, most were detailed to maintenance and groundskeeping duties. In addition to pay and canteen privileges, POWs had access to recreation facilities, religious services, sports, hobbies, music, books, and even plays and films. For the most part, prisoners held in Virginia were eager to work and caused no trouble. After the war, Radford auctioned off the tents and water pipes associated with the POW camp, and the site has since been reforested, leaving little trace of the former area. As for the prisoners themselves, many applied for citizenship so they could remain in the United States. Those who were repatriated returned to their countries with hundreds of dollars saved, which helped stimulate the struggling economies of their home nations and brought Europe back to life. To close, I'd like to share a poem about the Radford plant, written in 1941 and attributed to Porter J. Wynn. As always, thank you for listening, and I hope you join us for our next episode. In the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains, in the Old Dominion state, where the New River bends like a horseshoe round by the Flanagan estate. As the sun peeps over the misty hills and the river fog lifts like a shawl, there's a clang of machines and a clamor of men, over 20,000 in all. The peaceful scene of farm life has changed like a breeze in the night. Where the cattle grazed on the grassy slopes now rattles machinery of might. Like magic from a magician's wand, the whole countryside gives way to buildings of brick and steel and stone which rise from the river's clay. Through rain and snow and mud and sleet, each man has a job to do. 20,000 strong, they labor on, for powder must come through. Their country stands at a crossroad as they toil through night and day, determined it'll be forever free in the decent American way.